So starting January 5th, the United States will mandate COVID-19 tests for anyone who's entering the United States from China. For more on this, let's bring in former White House COVID response doctor Deborah Birx. Deborah, appreciate being here. This is something that actually caught my attention because they're not starting it now. Of course not. They have to start it January 5th. Why the lag?
Well, excellent point. It's exactly my concern. First, I'm glad we're testing rather than just relying on symptoms, which we did 3 years ago. But this testing should have started weeks ago. In order for the hospitals to be overwhelmed like we are seeing in China, it means that they've had widespread community spread for weeks. And so the number one tenet in pandemic response is to act early. And so we're once again acting late. And secondly, we should be testing upon landing. We have antigen tests now. We want to know whether people are infected. We know with these highly transmittable variants that we are seeing for the last year, that having a negative test 2 days ago does not mean anything. We're telling Americans before they go and spend time with their vulnerable relatives to test right before going. So we should be testing upon arrival. And everybody who's positive on arrival, we not only have to tell them to isolate, but we need to find what their sequences are that they're carrying into the country.
Yeah, doctor, and not to argue with you here, but like I'm done testing. I played that game. I've had COVID. I was fine. I'm not vaccinated. So, I mean, I'm not in a risk factor. However, that said, the people who are at risk factors maybe should practice some of these things. But do you think that China, who aggressively locked down to the extent that they were welding doors shut on apartment complexes, do you think those lockdowns made people's health immune systems more vulnerable once they started to lift these restrictions?
Well, what's made them really vulnerable is lack of immunization of their elderly. And you're absolutely right. We know clearly 3 years in who is vulnerable to severe disease. And that's why I was very careful to say, testing is relevant before you go and visit your vulnerable residents, your vulnerable American family members. And so, yes, for you and you're healthy, it's very different. But for people who are still vulnerable, and remember, we've lost two of our critical tools in protecting the immunosuppressed. We no longer have those monoclonal antibodies that are effective against these new variants. And so those immunosuppressed Americans that don't develop a good immune response to the vaccine and aren't protected, we don't have the same number of tools that we even had a year ago. And that's why this response to this China surge tells me that we're still not ready for pandemics in this country.
Yeah, my whole thing, though, is, like America, there were a lot of places that opened wide up and, they had an initial surge of cases. But are we worried about the wrong thing, would be my question. Are we worried about cases or worried about hospitalizations?
We're worried about protecting the vulnerable Americans.
Okay.
And so, if you have an 85-year-old grandmother, that's who you want to protect.
Sure.
Because that's the one that could get severe disease. And we have about 30 million Americans that are in a vulnerable category, either from immunosuppression or age. And I just want us to I know Americans are responsive to that. I see them being responsive in protecting their grandparents and those undergoing cancer chemotherapy. And that's what we need to continue to do. But we also have to realize that this is the third time from China that they've not been transparent. They weren't transparent with SARS in 2002, 2003. They weren't transparent at the beginning of this pandemic, and they haven't been transparent now. And I think it's very telling that the reason they say that there shouldn't be any restrictions or any testing is because they have it under control. That tells me that the reason they weren't transparent 3 years ago was because they believe that they had it under control.
Right.
And that's not a country's decision when the whole globe is at risk.
That is actually a very good point. The other thing I want to ask you is the variants. Okay, so we know that there was like Delta and Omicron and all these things. I've lost track of how many there are. Do we have any evidence to show if if China is ahead of us in variants, behind us, or how they would be affected by what we have, either vaccinated or herd immunity here in America?
Really great question, because remember, a lot of they haven't had as many waves as we have, so they have less natural infection immunity. We don't really know who was vaccinated or how protective that vaccine was. And what creates variants is previous infection. And so in a way, we're flying blind. They may actually have old variants They may have the original daughters of Omicron rather than the new variants we're seeing now.
Yeah.
And that's why it's really important. Any Chinese national that comes to the country and is hospitalized, we need to sequence those variants so that we know what's circulating. And remember, Chinese New Year's is coming. So
Yeah.
that's what precipitated the vast global spread 3 years ago. And we're headed into that time again with, again, a very similar outbreak in China as we had 3 years ago. And we're reacting late. And I think that's my real message.
Yeah.
For all the money we've spent on pandemic preparedness, for all of the planning, we still don't respond. And that's the key piece is detect, you have to respond. And we're still responding extraordinarily late like we did with monkeypox. And I'm worried that we just don't have a sense of urgency when we see these global things happening.
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting to see people respond to these things, and everybody's got their own, opinion at this point of COVID, including, how it was handled, coulda, woulda, shoulda. So it's interesting to look back and how history is going to remember this and how we move forward. Dr. Deborah Birx, we appreciate you being here.
No crooked establishment.
None of that twisting the
truth.
No talking down to me.
Don't tell me how to think.
Don't tell me how to think.
Don't tell me how to think.
I trust Newsmax.
Newsmax.
They don't tell me how to think.
They let
Me decide.
Newsmax.
real news
For real people.